I'm sure you're wondering whatever happened with that Windows update that was reportedly killing SSDs that I talked about a couple months ago. Was it ever fixed? Was it actually the Windows update? Well, it's around 2 months later, the dust has settled, and we haven't really heard much about it since. So if the problem was fixed, then what was the problem? And what about people saying that they are still having issues? Well, I did a ton of digging and reading, and I believe I've come up with probably the best conclusion you're going to find in terms of the causes, potential fixes, and how it related to that Windows update. In short, it seems that even though there was one common symptom, SSDs disappearing, there were actually several different independent and or overlapping causes. There were 3 confirmed possible root causes, and at least 4 other possible separate workarounds reported from users on Reddit that worked in their situations. I will get into specifics, but yes, that suggests that there could be 7 or more totally separate root causes. Now, if you're thinking, how can there be 7 different root causes? Again, like I said, multiple things can cause the same symptom. Just bear with me. As for that Windows update, KB506-3878, which was build 4946, it does seem to have played a role in some cases. I can elaborate more later. In any case, if that update was a root cause of some SSDs disappearing, it certainly was not the only one. I've also seen talk that suggests Microsoft actually fixed it in the next update for builds 5074 and higher. I'll get to the Windows update stuff in a minute though. Now, for the actually confirmed root causes by SSD manufacturers, there were 3 that I'm aware of. And remember, I'm not saying that these are the only causes, just ones that we know for sure can cause the symptom. I'll get to the others later. First, a Chinese DIY group discovered that there were some Phison controller-based SSDs out there with pre-release or beta firmware that had this issue. Like they may have been sent to early reviewers or something. And Phison tested and confirmed that this beta firmware was a potential cause, and they could reproduce it. Still, I don't think that explains why retail devices were affected, unless somehow some factories mistakenly installed the beta firmware on certain retail units and shipped it out, which I guess is possible. Although that also doesn't fully explain it, because many people said that it happened despite having the latest firmware. So while I'm sure this is a cause, it probably only explains a tiny fraction of them. The second cause has to do with overheating with inadequate airflow. One Dutch outlet, tweakers.net, found on their test benches that the problem could happen due to the drives overheating during heavy usage. Phison even said in an earlier statement that the heat could be an issue and suggested using a heatsink, though Phison did respond to these tests specifically and said that overheating would only really happen on test benches that don't have fans providing airflow, and that even a small amount of airflow would be sufficient to prevent overheating to failure, but still it could be a cause for extremely poorly cooled PCs. A third cause is old known firmware bugs that were already fixed by manufacturers, specifically some Samsung and Western Digital drives, but where users never updated to that new firmware, so they never got the patch. Specifically, Samsung had a critical firmware bug fixed way back in 2023 that would eventually cause failures over time in an unpatched drive. In this case, heavy users who never updated would have had their drives fail a long time ago, but light users who still haven't updated might now only be starting to experience failure. So some of that could just be continuing on to this day, even ongoing. And last year, some Western Digital drives were found to have a firmware bug that would cause BSODs, and apparently the same issue of drives disappearing, at least in some cases, though I don't think this bug causes permanent failure. And if I had to guess personally, I would think that these drives that are unpatched probably explains a lot of the failures we've seen, actually. Now, in my reading, I also found at least 4 more possible fixes reported by users. All are totally different, which could suggest 4 more unrelated root causes. In Jay's 2 cents case, he was able to fix it with a BIOS update. One Reddit user fixed it by disabling link state power management, though I will point out he said he's experienced the issues before the Windows update even. At least 2 Redditors were able to fix it by moving their NVMe to a different M.2 socket. One of them said that on their original socket, they even tried 2 different drives and both had issues, but the issue disappeared when they tried a different socket. So in that case, it almost certainly was the socket for those people, but strangely, they also say that the problem only started after the update. Could that be a coincidence? I don't know. But it also could hint that maybe the Windows update may have just been a contributing factor. Another user disabled Intel VMD volume management device in his BIOS, and he said that that fixed it, though several users in that thread gave explanations why, in this case, it probably had nothing to do with the Windows update, which I would agree with. The user said that Windows installed the notorious update that day, but his post was nearly a month after that update, long after it would have rolled out automatically. Though, as a possible explanation, I do believe it is possible for BIOS updates to happen through Windows Update for some pre-built builds, as well as updates to the Intel management engine, which I'm not going to get into. So if I had to guess, he probably got some Intel driver update or BIOS update that might have messed with some BIOS setting, rather than it being a Windows update itself, but still, it's a possible fix to consider. Okay, now let's actually get to that Windows update though. Was it the cause or not? Like I touched on, it definitely seems like something was going on with it, just based on the timing and all the people saying that they had issues right after it. But it was kind of paradoxical, where most of the time when people went to test it specifically, they couldn't reproduce it. If I had to guess, and I'm just speculating, I think the Windows update probably didn't directly cause the SSDs to crash, except in the case of SSDs that already had some kind of underlying issue or aggravating condition. I just think that if Windows update did directly cause perfectly fine SSDs to fail, it would have been way more widespread, or at least more reproducible than it was. Also, from what I've been reading, even though Microsoft didn't officially announce something, I suspect they may have actually added a fix, or at least a workaround, in the following update to build 5074 and up. For example, at least one user said that he was getting SSD issues in BSODs from even before the update, and it would be unable to do a memory dump, but with build 5074, it was a different BSOD error, and it was able to do a mini dump. So I assume in that case, the guy has a fully bad drive that he should probably replace, but maybe Windows added some kind of mitigations where it was not enough to fix his fully broken drive, but for drives that were affected by the other update, it might be enough to prevent them from crashing altogether. I was also reading an article from a German tech writer, Günther Born, and in the comments section, there was a user comment that the author suspects might be a Microsoft employee based on the username, who said, "It's Windows 11 24H2 4946 that's affected. After updating to 24H2 5074, most of the problems with HDDs and SSDs are fixed." Though there's no proof that this was a Microsoft employee, it is pretty specific and lines up with what others have experienced. For a moment, I thought that maybe it was some regular user saying that they had problems that went away after 5074, but the way they phrase it does rather imply it's from someone who at least believes they're in the know about it. I can put a longer explanation on the screen for what I mean, but suffice it to say, I think this likely was a Microsoft employee or at least someone with insider knowledge. In any case, however, I think Microsoft probably would never admit publicly that there was a problem, whether the root cause was their fault or not, simply to limit their liability. And I'm not sure we'll ever know either. It was apparently super rare, and it wasn't helped by the fact that a lot of people were jumping in saying, "Me too, it broke my SSDs too." But they were also saying that it's been happening to them from way before the update, so they just added noise when their issue was not related. I will quickly point out there was a theory I saw about Japanese versions of Windows getting updated with the wrong English version of a file, and that caused it, which seems to be totally wrong. I can put another explanation on the screen if you care. So what should you do if you are still experiencing the problem with your SSD disappearing? Basically, just try all the stuff we talked about. And of course, make sure Windows is actually up to date at this point. So first of all, make sure your SSD has the latest firmware from the manufacturer. That's just good in general. Another easy thing is to try disabling link state power management. That's just a power config setting within Windows. You can search that up on how to do it. Next, you could try a BIOS update if one is available for your motherboard. And you could also try disabling Intel VMD in the BIOS, though that seems to be probably not as related. If you still have issues after that, you could even try switching M.2 slots for your SSD. And finally, since this one costs money, if you don't already have a heatsink for your NVMe with the problem, get one. They are actually pretty cheap. If all of that fails, you probably have a bad drive, to be honest. I would try RMAing it or returning it to the manufacturer and get it replaced if it's still within the warranty. And again, this is all assuming that you have that specific issue where the drive is disappearing, not just blue screens in general, which can have a lot of causes, but hopefully one of those things will fix it. So I'd be curious what you guys think. Did you ever experience this problem and did it ever stop? Or maybe you've been having the issue forever and you can let us know if any of those things to try actually work. If you want to keep watching, next up I'd recommend the video where I talked about the latest major Windows feature update, 25H2. There's actually more to it than people say. I'll put that link right there you can click on. And if you like the video, be sure to give it a big giant thumbs up. It helps out. And if you want to subscribe, I try to make new videos about twice a week, so it should be worth it. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.